The show opens in the old city of Damascus, Syria, where we meet our protagonist, Damien Thorn, alongside his friend Amani. Both are photographers, and Amani gifts Damien a camera for his 30th birthday. They begin clicking pictures of the area, and Damien captures an image of an old woman who doesn't seem pleased. He thus nervously gives her a wave before moving on. All of a sudden, an armed patrol arrives to chase people they think are illegals and are suspected of being terrorists. Damien quickly begins taking photos of the chaos, but the soldiers try to force him out as well. As the situation spirals out of control, Damien and Amani run into their friend Kelly, who is also a photographer. Damien tries to help a few people in the street, but the same old woman he saw earlier grabs him and says, "Damien, I love you. It's all for you." A shocked Damien is hit with flashbacks from his childhood, remembering when his nanny hanged herself after saying those exact words. Just then, the woman is struck by a stone before she suddenly disappears. Soon after, all the locals are taken away by the soldiers. Damien begins searching for the old woman from earlier, and asks Kelly to find out where these people are being taken. But just then, Damien and Amani are discovered by the authorities, who take them away from the scene. In the next scene, Damien has been deported to New York and is stunned to discover that he and his friend are officially banned from Syria. He immediately calls Kelly, who is still in Damascus, and asks for her help in tracking down the old woman. It turns out Kelly captured the entire incident of the old woman speaking to him, and she's also equally stunned. Next, a desperate Damien visits a military academy to meet an old friend, hoping to get help in returning to Syria. His friend isn't much help, but Damien crosses paths with a mysterious woman named Anne Rutledge, who claims she has known him since childhood. Damien doesn't recognize her, but she reveals that the last time she saw him was at his father's funeral, when he was still a boy. She reveals that she is in the protection business, but doesn't go into much detail. Days later, Kelly also returns to New York, and Damien rushes to her place to meet her. She shows him the video she captured, and reveals that the old woman in Syria spoke to him in Latin about a beloved son. Shockingly, those were the exact same words John spoke to Jesus when he was baptized on his 30th birthday. This means the old woman essentially baptized Damien with her blood, since it was also his 30th birthday. Horrified, Damien admits that he doesn't remember much of his childhood, but tells Kelly about the time his nanny hanged herself after saying the exact same words as the old woman. In the following days, Kelly and Damien dig deeper into the matter, determined to find the old woman. Kelly uncovers that Damien's father had been working with a biblical scholar named Carl Bugenhagen before his death. She also tracks down a man named Professor Reneus, a former student of Bugenhagen, who might have some crucial information. Without wasting any time, the duo rushes to meet Professor Reneus at his residence, and the man kindly lets them inside. Damien wonders why his father was seeking out a biblical scholar, since he wasn't a God-fearing man. Reneus explains that his father wanted information on the beast mentioned in the Book of Revelation, a figure to be worshipped like a king before its true nature would be revealed. The word Antichrist is never used in Revelation, but they believe it refers to the same entity. The professor then asks Damien if he knows anything about the number 666, but the young man replies, no. A frustrated Damien begins to leave, but Reneus pleads with him to accept Christ as his savior. After the duo leaves the house, we see 3 Rottweilers outside, which immediately attack Reneus and brutally maul him to death. Later, Damien and Kelly return to his place, trying to make sense of the bizarre situation. Kelly then receives a call informing her that the professor has died, which horrifies her. When Damien learns of this, he deduces that it's because of him and asks Kelly to leave, as she could be in danger. She wants to stay by his side, but he angrily yells at her and forces her to leave in tears. Later, Kelly is about to drive away when her car suddenly gets stuck in a ditch and cannot move. She tries to fix it when, all of a sudden, a river of mud starts to suck her into the earth. Kelly begins screaming for help, and Damien rushes over to get her out. But Kelly is dragged into the mud by an invisible force, and Damien has no choice but to helplessly watch her die. The next morning, the authorities arrive to take the dead body away, and Damien is devastated by her death. Elsewhere, we see 2 priests with a strange dagger, discussing Professor Reneus' death the previous night and the fact that Damien visited him. One of the priests says they waited too long to kill Damien, and it must be done soon. Meanwhile, a distraught Damien visits a church and breaks down in tears, pleading to God for answers. He then touches a crucifix, when all of a sudden, the structure begins to crumble before him. Damien has a flashback to when his father tried to kill him in a church as a child. Horrified, he leaves the church, only to notice the same old Syrian lady standing outside. Damien approaches her, but she aggressively grabs him and pulls a huge chunk of his hair before being restrained by onlookers. Later, at home, Damien looks at the pictures he's taken over the years and notices the same old woman in all of them. This horrifies him, and when he checks the spot on his scalp where she tore his hair, he is shocked to see the mark 666. In another scene, a priest gives a dagger to a man and instructs him to kill Damien by striking him in the heart. We then learn that this is the last of the 7 daggers of Megiddo, though the locations of the others are unknown. At this point, shocking information is revealed. Damien is actually the Antichrist, destined to eventually unleash destruction on Earth. While they are talking, the priest suddenly collapses dead in the confessional, so the young man panics and immediately flees the scene. The scene then cuts to Kelly's funeral at a church, where Damien has arrived arrived with Amani. Damien is shocked to notice Anne Rutledge as well, whose presence makes him feel uneasy. He is also distracted by a mysterious man, unaware that he has come to kill him. Soon, Kelly's sister begins giving a speech, while Damien starts having bizarre visions of Christian statues and paintings. Suddenly, the window glass shatters, and Damien rushes outside feeling sick. While Anne approaches to comfort him, he asks how she knew Kelly, and Anne reveals that she knows a lot of people. After the funeral, there's a small gathering for those mourning their loss. Damien's friends then talk about how he has been around many horrible, destructive events around the world, yet somehow always comes out unharmed, making him appear very lucky. Damien is then approached by his boss, who hands him a check for $55,000, saying that Anne bought all of his pictures from Syria. This shocks Damien, and he can't understand why the woman is so interested in him. In the evening, Damien is in the streets, taking pictures of homeless people, while being followed by the man who has come to kill him. Damien is soon confronted by an old homeless man who warns him that darkness is coming. His attention then shifts to a little girl with one eye sewn shut, who writes 666 on a misted window. While Damien stares at her, the assassin emerges from the dark and attacks him with the dagger. The two men engage in an intense fight, but suddenly a car appears out of nowhere and hits the assassin. He dies within seconds, while the dagger slips through a grate and disappears beneath the surface. In the aftermath, the authorities arrive, and a detective named James interrogates Damien, who reveals that the assassin had been following him since the funeral. He claims he was attacked with a dagger, but James finds it suspicious, as no dagger has been found. The detective also thinks it's odd that he has been involved in 2 accidents in the past few days, both of which he survived unharmed. Just then, Anne shows up, claiming to be Damien's legal counsel, and takes him away from the officer. Afterward, Damien brings Anne to his place, where she begins asking him about the dagger the assassin had. She asks if any figures were carved into it, but Damien doesn't recall much. Anne then tells him that she has been watching him for a long time and reveals a shocking piece of information. He is adopted. He doesn't believe her, but she explains that his adoptive mother gave birth that night in Rome, but the child was stillborn. A priest then convinced his father to adopt Damien in place of their dead child, without the mother ever knowing. Upon hearing all this, Damien is shocked, and Anne invites him to her place if he wants answers. The two soon arrive at her luxurious house, where he sees that she's an obsessive collector of his photos, which he finds somewhat creepy. She also shows him a dagger similar to the one the assassin had, which once again triggers a flashback of his father trying to kill him with a similar weapon. Next, Anne takes him to the basement, where Damien is shocked to see that there's an entire shrine dedicated to him. The place is filled with all his photographs and the old belongings he has owned since childhood. He also notices his old tricycle, which triggers memories of when he used it to cause his mother to fall off a balcony, an accident that eventually led to her death. Elsewhere, Detective James is shocked when his subordinate informs him that Damien had visited Professor Aeneas before his death. He realizes there's something seriously wrong with the man and decides to investigate more deeply. While he is alone in his office, a Rottweiler is seen keeping an eye on him. Upon seeing his tricycle, Damien accuses her of keeping a murder weapon, but Anne insists that it wasn't his fault that his mother died. She then claims that she has been with him for a long time and has essentially raised him, but Damien insists that he raised himself. Anne finally informs him that he is the Antichrist and that a large group of people has been protecting him his entire life. Damien doesn't believe all this and asks what she wants from him, but she says that simply being with her is enough. All of this further confuses Damien, and he angrily leaves the house, hoping they will never meet again. The next day, Damien tries to find his birth records, but is shocked to discover that the hospital in Rome where he was born has been burnt down. He shares all of this with Amani, and points out how strange it is that Anne had kept an entire shrine dedicated to him. This shocks Amani as well, and he reveals to Damien that both of them have been fired from their jobs out of nowhere. In the next scene, Damien goes to meet an old man named John Lyons, who's the former Secretary of State. It turns out the two were good friends when Damien used to live in the White House after his parents died. They briefly talk about their old days, after which Damien asks John about Anne. John then reveals that one of his friends founded Armitage Global, a financial services company that also operates as a private security force. It turns out Anne also works there and had been involved in some shady activities, which John's friend was about to investigate. Then, his friend's house mysteriously caught fire on Christmas, killing his entire family. John warns Damien that Anne is dangerous and urges him to be cautious around her. Upon hearing all this, a shocked Damien leaves and arrives outside Armitage Global to spy on Anne. Meanwhile, we see John also inside the building, and in a shocking twist, he is Anne's superior, and they are all part of a group tasked with protecting Damien. Their mission is to guide Damien toward fulfilling his destiny of causing the apocalypse. So Anne is trying to gain his trust because she wants him to embrace his role rather than forcing it. But John is frustrated by Damien's recent attack and scolds Anne for failing to protect him. Fed up with her approach, he assigns the job to another man named Troy, who will take a forceful approach to ensure Damien fulfills his destiny. This leaves Anne very frustrated, and she soon learns that Damien is outside the building spying on her. She comes up with an idea and takes Troy out of the building for a conversation. They chat about normal things at first, but she soon begins saying inappropriate things about his daughter to provoke him. Suddenly, she pretends to be attacked and falls to the ground. Damien notices this and rushes to help her, at which point Anne tells Troy that Damien will now kill him. A frightened Troy runs away, while Damien approaches Anne, who tells him that Troy wants to kill him. With this, an intense chase ensues between Damien and Troy on a subway platform. Damien loses sight of him but soon saves a little boy from getting hit by a train. Meanwhile, Troy trips on an escalator and gets his tie caught in the conveyor belt, which ultimately rips his face off. Soon after, the authorities arrive, and Damien is left shocked by what has just happened. That night, James is working in his office and finds it bizarre that Damien was once again present at the accident of another man. Since it's getting very late, he decides to call it a day and leaves for home when suddenly the Rottweiler appears again and tries to attack him. James is injured, but he manages to shoot and kill the animal before things can go too far. Meanwhile, Damien is back at his apartment, horrified by the deaths that have been happening around him and blaming himself. Not long after, Anne shows up at his place with some food and begins manipulating him. She then shows him a disturbing picture he took years ago in which a woman and her newborn were killed by soldiers in a war zone. Anne tries to convince him to accept his position as the Antichrist, telling him that there is evil inside him and that he cannot run away from it no matter what. However, Damien refuses to believe any of this and asks her to leave. She requests to freshen up first and goes to the bathroom, where she cuts a fresh 666 into her flesh over the old mark. Upon returning, Damien tells her about the old lady he met in Damascus and reveals how she had been present at every stage of his life. He also shows her his birthmark on the scalp, which says 666. Anne thanks him for trusting her and proceeds to leave, but we see that she's extremely happy to see his birthmark. She cries at first, then almost orgasms with excitement as the episode comes to an end. Don't forget to subscribe, leave 1,500 likes or 200 comments for part 2.